I am Iron Man.
The movie that started it all, and I don't mean that Iron Man started the whole comic book movie thing when I say that. What I mean is that Iron Man is the movie that really defined this generation of comic book movies. It started the MCU, which spanned all throughout the last decade. That's pretty amazing when you think about it, and the MCU was by far the biggest thing comic book movies had going for them in the 2010s. Sure, movies like The Dark Knight helped define this generation as well, but Iron Man started something that several franchises have tried to replicate ever since. Without this movie, without the post-credit scene of Nick Fury coming in and telling Tony about the Avengers Initiative, we wouldn't have the MCU, a franchise that defined the entirety of the 2010s. It defined an entire decade. And without this movie, none of that may have even been possible. Now, moving on from what this movie did for the comic book genre onto the movie itself. Even if this wasn't the movie that started the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this movie would still be great. It's one of the greatest superhero origins in cinema. Tony's transition into Iron Man, the origin of the character of Iron Man in this movie is just great, and Tony Stark is just supported by a great cast of characters. The cast of the movie itself is just insanely good. Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane is a standout, along with Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, of course. There isn't really a bad performance in this movie, but those are the two standouts for me. The first and second acts of the movie are stellar. We get hints to The Mandalorian with the 10 rings, and it's a shame that they couldn't deliver on that with Iron Man 3. The entire time Tony is being held hostage with the Doctor in the cave, it's extremely captivating and extremely entertaining to watch. Just to see Tony build this suit from scrap he finds in the cave, it's extremely interesting, and that's of course the Mark I Iron Man armor that he escapes the cave with. And the cave escape is one of the greatest and most memorable scenes in any comic book movie. Then he, of course, upgrades to an armor. It has the signature Hot Rod Red that he has later in the MCU, and of course he upgrades his suit as the MCU goes on. But back to Iron Man, I do think the third act takes a little away from the movie, and it starts the trend of the main villain being an evil version of the hero. But even though I'm not a major fan of the third act of this movie, I think Obadiah Stane is one of the great villains that started off the MCU. He's probably the best before Loki. And I really like the dynamic between him and Tony, but just the final fight between the two when they're both in the Iron Man armors it's underwhelming. It's an underwhelming climax to the film. But even though the third act isn't the best, the first two acts are extremely good. It's one of the greatest superhero origin movies ever, and this movie started the MCU, so it will forever be one of the most iconic and important superhero movies of all time. So those were my overall thoughts on Iron Man. If you have another movie you want me to talk about, go ahead and leave it down in the comments below. I will be sure to touch on that if enough people want it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys next time.
Iron Man.